All right, carnivore diet is clearly the worst, most harmful dietary quote-unquote fad ever to exist as per this guy. Take a listen here.
Yeah, he's going to give me a heart attack, right? Wrong. Only thing that'll lead to heart disease is sugars and processed garbage.
Wrong. And the difference between you and me is that I actually provide evidence to back up my claims. I honestly believe that this carnivore trend is going to be one of the most harmful dietary fads to ever become popular. Not only are you missing out on beneficial nutrients and fiber when you avoid vegetables, but we also have mountains of evidence to show that saturated fat raises your LDL or bad cholesterol, and that there is a linear association between LDL exposure and the risk of cardiovascular disease. And this is not just based on observational research, as these people often claim, but also Mendelian randomization studies and randomized control trials. Why should you care? Well, heart and circulatory diseases are the world's biggest killers, and this is no joke. In simple terms, it's because the bad cholesterol leads to a build-up of plaque in your arteries and obstructs blood flow. And as I know the carnivore crowd loves to ignore data and rely on anecdote, I'll give you an anecdote. This carnivore advocate ended up having a heart attack despite looking and feeling healthy, which highlights the point that you might feel great, but you won't feel the build-up of plaque in your arteries. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't consume red meat or saturated fat and be healthy, because as I always say, the devil is in the dose. But it is just utter nonsense to completely deny the risks. And this is why it's recommended that you keep your saturated fat intake to below 10% of your total.
All right, so, in the usual, what appears to be condescending arrogance that we often hear from these people about they know it all and I have the science type of thing, there's a lot of nuance that they tend to leave out here. Now remember, LDL cholesterol's association with cardiovascular disease are clearly been derived in, number one, often sick populations, and number two, people eating mixed diets. And so whether or not that applies directly to people on low-carb, ketogenics, and carnivore diets still remains to be seen. Is it a risk factor? Cause a risk factor? Certainly, probably, perhaps. Is it equally as problematic for all people in all situations? Clearly not. There is some nuance here. And one of the things that, we talk about saturated fat. Well, if we look at the U.S. diet, where does saturated fat come from in the U.S. diet? Is it coming from meat, milk, and eggs and things like that? Well, just for those that don't know, red meat, unprocessed red meat, only accounts for about 3 or 4% of the saturated fat in the United States diet. And that is largely what a carnivore diet consists of. Most of the saturated fat in the United States diet comes from things like processed food, dessert products, and sandwiches, and pizzas, and lasagnas, cakes and cookies, things that have butter and eggs made in them. That's where most of us get our saturated fat. So we don't know if that has a differential effect. In fact, it most likely does. Eating a cupcake is not the same thing as eating a steak. Now, their study here, this is a Mortensen study from Western Denmark Heart Registry study, looking at LDL cholesterol and coronary artery calcium scores. Those with a 0 coronary artery calcium score, LDL cholesterol had no bearing on progression to things like heart attacks. Now, this is the other thing that these people love to do. This is a picture that he uses of this guy, the carnivore kid, as he calls himself. One, he did not have a heart attack. He himself states that I did not have a heart attack. In fact, he had significant cardiovascular disease prior to ever starting a carnivore diet. He had a significantly high CAC score. He did not have a heart attack. He bought an Apple Watch. He noticed that it picked up an arrhythmia that he was asymptomatic for, right? His watch said, oh, your heart's doing something goofy. So he went to get it checked out by a cardiologist. Cardiologist said, well, let's do a angiography to see what's going on. They found out that he had stenosis, which has likely been there maybe for many, many years. And they end up doing a revascularization procedure. So you cannot claim that the carnivore diet caused that or did not cause that. That is unknown in this case. And so that particular quote-unquote anecdote is just completely wrong. I can certainly provide anecdotes of people where they've seen coronary calcium go the other way, go the opposite way. So again, this is something that, the assurance, the smug assurance that you are going to have a heart attack over the long term with a carnivore diet. Now, this is obviously a young person. It's probably the old Dunning-Kruger curve, where he still probably thinks he knows it all. He's not been around the block. He's not dealt with sick patients over time, most likely. He's not dealt with people with diseases, or at least significantly many of them, as I have. I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of them in my career. He doesn't know what it is to suffer. He doesn't know what it is to get people that are no longer suffering. And so one of the reasons, and the only reason the carnivore diet is so popular, or becoming so popular, is because it helps people to stop suffering. And as a physician, that should be your number one goal. And so, we'll see over time, right? We'll see over time. My suspicion, now again, I've said this before, I don't know if carnivore diets will result in greater or less cardiovascular disease or longevity or anything else, because it is unknowable. It is unknowable for any diet out there, just to put a finer point on that. Anybody that claims their diet is going to make you live longer is basically full of shit. Okay, that's just the bottom line. Now, does getting healthier, no longer being diabetic, no longer being obese, no longer being hypertensive, no longer being inflamed, no longer having symptomatic autoimmune disease confer a benefit? Clearly it does, at least in the short term, and probably, I will say that probably in the long term. And I will say that probably if you lose weight, get healthier, and all those things occur, you will probably live longer. Again, I can't say it with 100% certainty, but I can say it with decent probability. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. I like these young people that seem to think they know everything. They don't. I don't. No one does. So anyway, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.